One of the biggest questions that has been in the minds of a lot of Need for Speed fans is, why aren't the games good anymore? Or why have the games seemed to be on a steady decline? It's like there is no drive for the dev team and EA to pump out great games anymore. It seems like there is little encouragement to actually put effort into the games, and those who are asking those questions and making those observations, y'all are correct. We have a bunch of videos on the channel on why the series is going downhill, but one thing we have yet to talk about is regarding the fact that there is no competition. I think it's safe to say that Need for Speed hasn't been pushing out games with the best quality because there is no competition against them anymore. Due to them running the arcade racing genre for so long with no other games even making a dent in it, they have become complacent and no longer strive to excel in anything. Think about Call of Duty, right? Which releases games that are half-baked and unfinished every single year. They are going to keep doing that because no other games are in their sphere. Every other game that tries to come around is either shut down like X-Defiant or just becomes irrelevant. They know that gamers who want an arcade shooter are going to come to Call of Duty because that is the only series that they can go to that has a huge and active player base and is constantly getting new things. The same goes for Need for Speed and their franchise. Competition is the lifeline of innovation, especially in genres like arcade racing, where creativity can stagnate quickly without opposing forces pushing the limits every time a new game is announced or comes out. When studios are forced to outdo each other, they take risks, refine mechanics, and pursue new ideas that advance what was previously the apex. In the early 2000s, franchises like Need for Speed, Burnout, Midnight Club, Juiced, they were locked in a creative arms race, each trying to offer faster gameplay, better customization, better open worlds, things of that nature. This competition led to landmark innovations like destructible environments, advanced tuning systems, and big unforgettable open world designs. Without rivals challenging the status quo, studios, aka EA, grow very complacent, producing safe, repetitive experiences that offer visual polish but little to no substance. In today's market, the absence of strong alternatives to Need for Speed has allowed the franchise to drift completely into mediocrity, rarely challenged to evolve beyond recycled stuff over and over again from game to game. The truth is that without meaningful competition, the arcade racing genre risks becoming forgotten about and washed. When a single franchise dominates by default rather than because it's actually better than everything else, innovation becomes optional and not essential when making games. Developers begin designing for market trends, not for passionate players and those who are deep within the car community. Instead of building a game for those who love the thrill of racing, the focus shifts to maximizing engagement, making the most amount of money, and just putting a bunch of gimmicks in the game meant to draw short-term attention. The genre becomes more about lifestyle and what the rappers are doing than actual racing, more about avatars than the cars that are actually being driven. It's only when a worthy rival emerges, something with the audacity to innovate and be better, that a dominant franchise like Need for Speed is forced to actually evolve and come out with better games. One of the biggest things that people in the Need for Speed community like to talk about are the games and their stories. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that the stories have gone downhill since other racing games have stopped competing with Need for Speed. Need for Speed stories have never been great, don't get me wrong, but the stuff we are getting now is just absolute slop in the worst way. One of the most glaring consequences of Need for Speed's unchecked dominance in the arcade racing space is it has become lazy, tone deaf, storytelling that actively undermines the street racing culture it claims to celebrate. Need for Speed was built off of the street racing culture, yet you wouldn't even be able to tell in Unbound. Instead of crafting narratives that reflect the raw passion and danger of the underground, titles like Unbound churn out cliche-ridden, influencer-inspired plots that feel more like marketing experience than actual grounded narratives. This game sometimes felt so disconnected from the actual car culture and what things are like in the underground leagues that I forgot I was actually playing a Need for Speed game. And trying to mimic the flashy appeal of Hollywood and social media, Need for Speed has lost touch with the character-driven stories that could have anchored the experience in something emotionally or culturally real. The lack of any serious narrative competitor in the arcade racing genre has enabled Need for Speed to get away with shallow generic storytelling because there's no one forcing them to do better. If a game like Midnight Club or a narrative-driven rival were still active in the scene, EA would have no choice but to treat their stories with more weight and depth. But in this vacuum, mediocrity is the norm. And it's the players, especially those who crave real representation of the car culture, who are left with games that feel artificial and forced. If a new arcade racing game launched today with a genuine, compelling, character-driven story rooted in real car culture, it would destroy the Need for Speed franchise and potentially kill it off entirely. The market is starved for a narrative that treats street racing with the same emotional weight and depth as classic crimes or sports films, rather than a flashy backdrop for weird 2025 lingo and cringe characters that aren't worth their weight. A game that takes place into the heart of underground racing, showing the sacrifices, actual rivalries, real community, grit that defines the scene. That's what people are missing, right? In doing so, it would expose just how hollow and directionless Need for Speed has actually become. With the right writing, atmosphere, and respect for car culture, a game that would come out besides Need for Speed, it wouldn't just compete with Need for Speed, it would make Need for Speed feel completely irrelevant. It would force EA to either dramatically rethink their approach or finally lose their grip on a genre that they've coasted through for way too long. In my last video, we briefly touched on Need for Speed and how it's lost the plot. The theme that it once had and was known for is barely even around anymore. The Need for Speed franchise's erratic shifts in tone, style, and identity aren't signs of creative versatility, they're signs of them being desperate. Without meaningful competition to force them to push through into new innovation, the franchise has become a shapeshifter. They keep rebranding themselves every new release in hopes of staying relevant. One game, neon lit street racing, right, with Heat. The whole next game throws players into a graffiti colored cartoon world, which is Unbound, leaving all the fans that are deep within Unbound unsure of what it even means anymore. This inconsistency isn't exploration, it's just confusion. It's born from a lack of vision and an over-reliance on trend chasing. In trying to appeal to everyone, once again, Need for Speed appeals to no one deeply enough to cultivate lasting loyalty. And I'll tell you guys what it is. Need for Speed is spineless. They are constantly reinventing themselves just out of fear of fading into irrelevance. Instead of building on a foundation like what they had been doing with all the older games, they keep panicking with each new release, throwing in new aesthetics, characters, gimmicks, all that sort of stuff just to see what sticks with the community. This approach has alienated longtime fans and confused all the new ones, because the new ones thought it was going to be like the older games, reducing the franchise to a testing ground for marketing. Why is this happening? Because no one is around to force it into a corner and become better. If a new arcade racing game dropped today that genuinely cared about its story, crafted with real emotional stuff, believable characters, a narrative that respects the culture, it could expose Need for Speed for the hollow spectacle it has become. Such a game would highlight just how performative and disconnected Need for Speed actually is and its storytelling really is, forcing players to question why they even settled for something like Need for Speed in the first place. The moment players experience a real racing game where the story isn't just an afterthought or a gimmick, but a driving force that complements the gameplay, Need for Speed is cooked. EA's reliance on trends would no longer even be enough. The franchise coasting on nostalgia and brand recognition would be exposed, and that would be it. They would either be left in the dust or would finally be forced to evolve. The state of Need for Speed and its franchise and the arcade racing genre as a whole is a reflection of what happens when competition disappears and creative ambition gives way to corporate complacency and greed. What was once a series that led the way in pretty much everything and built on attitude, innovation, and the car culture has become trend setting, right? It has no clear identity. In the absence of serious rivals, Need for Speed has relied on style over substance. It's superficial, it's forgettable, all while alienating the very people that helped make it iconic in the first place. Meanwhile, developers chase fleeting attention spans and viral aesthetics rather than crafting experiences with lasting impact or emotional depth. If a new contender were to rise, one that respects the essence of street racing while pushing a new narrative and great gameplay, it wouldn't just challenge Need for Speed, y'all. It would literally redefine what the genre is entirely. But until then, Need for Speed remains a shell of what it was, and that's people wishing it could be better. It's proof that without competition to push it forward, even a franchise that was on top of the world and as great as Need for Speed can still fall out and crash and burn.